Okay, thank you. Carrying on. From 1871 onwards, the Board of Guardians and Clerk of Guardians were granted even more guardian responsibilities, with the creation of districts called sanitary districts governed by a sanitary authority responsible for various health matters, including mental health, legally known as sanity. Through the Local Government Act of 1871, Public Health Act of 1872 and Public Health Act of 1875, the Board of Guardians and the Clerk of Guardians were also granted guardianship over minors through the Guardianship of Infants Act 1886 and 1925. So this is why if you end up in the family court, your child can be assigned the children's independent lawyer, it's called, because the court / the church is guardian over the children. The children are its chattel. Here, this document tells you very clearly that you are chattel. You are owned. That's what that's all telling you there, and all the UCC filings that tell you this, human capital. But now the UCC filings from last Christmas rebut all of these, and they themselves remain unrebutted. So your child is their chattel, and they can do what they want with it, which is what they do. Right, next, significantly from 1879 with the Summary Jurisdiction Act 1879, the Clerk of the Peace, also known as the Clerk of the Guardians, also known as the Clerk of the Magistrates, also known as the Registrar of the Court of Record, was granted the powers of the Clerk of the Privy Council as their agent for summary judgment matters. Thus, when the Clerk of the Magistrates or their agent, such as a justice's clerk, issues a summons or warrant under Crown seal, the matter could be handled as a summary judgment simply by evoking these extraordinary powers over all subjects, regardless of whether they were poor, insane, or a minor. In 1929, in the United Kingdom, with the Local Government Act 1929, the Board of Guardians, as well as the position of Clerk of Guardians, were finally abolished by allocating their power to a different office. The Board of Guardians became council of a county or borough, and clerk to the guardians became clerk of the county, council or town clerk, and guardian as an individual became a member of the council or of a county or borough, and poor law union became a county or borough. In most Western countries following Roman Curia law and English law, the town clerk remains effectively the clerk of the guardians, the clerk of the peace, the agent of the clerk of the Privy Council, the clerk of the magistrates, the registrar of the Court of Record, and the justices clerks of magistrates' courts, their agent possessing the claimed power to conclude summary judgment. Claimed power, that's delusion. There's no such thing. In God's law, in divine law, there's no such thing as claimed power. Everything would be sorted out via a jury or a panel of elders, but certainly not by one person. Based on the continued claimed powers of the clerk and their agents, a magistrates' court is effectively a court of wards and guardians with a hearing effectively either examination or a summary judgment for petty matters limited by cost and penalty. And certainly if you've got a broken family, that is a petty matter as far as they are concerned. You are just peasants out in the paddock who haven't got along well enough, and they'll come and sort it out for you and flick the child back and forward for you, no problems. Upon the presumptions of power claimed by the clerks, when one attends a Roman law magistrates' court, it is presumed one has consented to being treated as a ward, unless such presumptions are rejected before attendance or immediately upon being brought forcibly before the magistrates' court. So in my affidavits, this is in the family court matters, I very much declared that I was not coming as a Roman slave, and all, quite a number of of statements I made, and yet still it was ignored. This is how this system continues to chug along, because it just breaks its own law. An affidavit is the swearing of your word before God. There is nothing higher than your word before God. So for someone to overrule your word is to say they are presuming themselves to be higher than God. Well, there's just no such position. So it's time that all this got weeded out, which is exactly what is happening. Okay, let's see. Where did I get up to? Right, as the claimed authority of councils and boards of commissioners in their capacity as boards of guardians is founded on a history of fraud and the disenfranchisement of men and women from their rightful inheritance through voluntary enslavement and admission of being paupers, such powers are wholly without legitimacy and lawful effect. Given the claimed authority and powers of the town clerk and their agents by claiming historic authority as effectively the clerk of the guardians, the clerk of the peace, the agent of the clerk of the privy council, the clerk of the magistrates, and the register of the court of record, is based on a historic of fraud, voluntary enslavement, and false premise. All authority and power of justices, clerks of magistrates' courts, and their principal is null and void from the beginning. It is null and void. It is totally null and void. And as of 2014, it will definitely become much more evident that it is null and void now. You are legally a slave, just as your parents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents were slaves. You may be lucky enough to live in a pleasant plantation with other slaves, managed by overseer slaves, such as police, judges, doctors, and politicians, where few examples of slave cruelty occur, or you may be witnessing changes in the community plantation, which is part of a state slave plantation and national slave plantation, where there is more crime, more misery and death. The fact that you are a slave is unquestionable. The only unknown is whether you will permit your children and their children to also grow up as slaves. Well, the consciousness has shifted, and there's certainly a massive movement that will not be allowing that to happen. So if you're listening to this, and if you're on the cusp of this awakening, I hope you're getting quite a shock to hear what it is you've been embroiled in, because it's really revolting. Upon a new child being born, the executors or administrators of the higher estate willingly and knowingly convey the beneficial entitlements of the child as beneficiary into the first Sester KV trust in the form of a registry number by registering the name, thereby also creating the corporate person and denying the child any rights as an owner of real property. Sorry that my screen keeps going off there. You are a slave because since 1933, when a child is born, the executors or administrators of the higher estate knowingly and willingly claim the baby as chattel to the estate. The slave-baby contract is then created by tricking the parents into signing the baby away through the deceitful legal meanings on the live birth record, also known as the birth certificate. This live birth record as a promissory note is converted into a slave bond sold to the private reserve bank of the estate and then conveyed into a second and separate Sester KV trust per child owned by the bank. Upon the promissory note reaching maturity and the bank being unable to seize the slave child, a maritime lien is lawfully issued to salvage the lost property, and it's self-monetised as currency issued in series against the Sester KV Trust. You are a slave because since 1540 and the creation of the first Sester KV Act, deriving its power from the papal bull of Roman cult leader Pope Paul III of the same year, whenever a child is baptized, a baptismal certificate is issued by the state at birth or church. The parents have knowingly or unknowingly gifted, granted and conveyed the soul of the baby to a third Sester KV Trust owned by Roman cult, which has held this valuable property in its vaults ever since, managed by the Temple Bar since 1540 and subsequent bar associations from the 19th century, representing the reconstituted Gala, responsible as grim reapers for reaping the souls, or salvage, also known as salvation of the souls. Okay, not too much longer to go. I've got a couple of pages, but we'll just keep going because it's worth knowing all this. Now we're getting into some UCC stuff. Therefore, under the UCC slave laws, which some of them are here, the UCC slave laws, human capital, how you become a slave for the money that doesn't exist. Therefore, under the UCC slave laws, which most slave plantations of the world operate, you can never own a house, even though they trick you into believing you do. You never really own a car or boat or any other object. You only have the benefit of use. Indeed, you do not even own your own body, which is claimed to have been lawfully gifted by your parents at your birth on the commercial transaction document we know as the live-born record, or the birth certificate, against which a QSIP number is issued and sold to the central bank. Yes, the banks claim your flesh. The banks are indeed the modern slave owners, hiding these indisputable facts upon which their money system is built from the people. But there's so many great documentaries now regarding the banking system that if you really wanted to know what went on in banking, there's no reason why you wouldn't know. I've already given a couple of reference points for the banking system to take a look at that. Common law is nothing more than the laws of voluntary servitude and the laws of voluntary slavery to the Roman cult and the Venetian slave masters. It is the job of the overseer slaves to convince you that you are not slaves. The common law still exists and that you have and has not been largely abolished and replaced with commercial law to confuse you, to give you false hope. In return, they are rewarded as loyal slaves with bigger homes to use and more privileges than other slaves. The reason why the overseer slaves such as judges, politicians, bankers, actors and media personalities are forced to lie and deny we are all slaves is because the slave system of voluntary servitude or common law was not the first global slave system, but merely its evolution. Before the emergence of common law, we were all subjected to being considered mere animals or things under canon law of the Roman cult, also known as the law of the sea or admiralty law. Under admiralty law, you are either a slave of the ship or state or merely cargo for lawful salvage. There, what do you think about that? Your cargo to be salvaged. Alright, I'm going to stop there and put a fresh one on. I won't be long.